Extremist hate comes in many forms. Christian Picciolini personified white power extremist hatred and violence for years as a leading member of America's first neo-Nazi skinhead gang. Today, he is founder of the peace advocacy organization Life After Hate and author of Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. And Christian Picciolini joins us now from Chicago, Illinois, to shed light on that life, what draws people to extremism, and how to get them out again. Christian, it's great to have you on TVO tonight. I want to start by just showing a picture of you back in the day, swastika armbands, looking very much the neo-Nazi that you were. And I guess I want to start by asking, what did joining a neo-Nazi group, as you did, as a teenager, offer you that you didn't have in your life that you apparently thought you needed?
Well, Steve, thanks for having me. Back in 1987, when I was first introduced to the neo-Nazi skinhead movement, it was a bit of a perfect storm. I was 14 years old at the time, and like most other teenagers and preteens, I was disaffected. I felt bullied, and I wanted to do something that mattered. I was really called to do something important with my life. I was very ambitious. So when at 14 years old, I was standing in an alley smoking a joint, and like a scene out of a movie, a 1968 Firebird roared down the alley, and it was kicking up gravel and spitting out rocks and dust, and it screeched to a halt and skid 2 feet from me when a man with a shaved head and tall black boots got out of the passenger seat of the car and walked towards me. And he looked me in the eyes, and he grabbed the joint from my mouth, and he said, "Don't you know that that's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile?" Now, I was 14 years old. The only communists that I knew were the ones in movies that I loved, like Rocky IV. I don't think I'd ever met a Jewish person at that point, and I hardly knew what the word docile meant. But to me, it brought a structure, it brought a family, and it brought a way to fulfill something inside of me that I saw as very important. I wanted to matter. And while I wasn't pulled in initially by the politics of the movement, I was brought in by the sense of identity that I was building through joining this group. I wasn't picked on anymore, I wasn't bullied anymore, and all of a sudden I had a sense of purpose.
Part of the perfect storm you just referred to, I presume, or let me put it this way, people might presume, because I've seen the book and I know that's not the case, is that you came from a bad home, a dysfunctional family. Not the case for you, though.
No, that's actually not the case for me. And it's very typical that most people who join extremist movements tend to come from broken homes where parents maybe aren't there or are drug addicted or alcoholics, and that wasn't the case for me. In fact, my parents were Italian immigrants who came to the United States in the mid-1960s, so when they came here, they were often the victims of prejudice themselves. I wasn't raised in a home where racism existed. And I wasn't taught to be prejudiced towards anybody. It was something that I found on the streets because when my parents came to this country for their slice of the American pie, they believed that they needed to work very, very hard to do so. And I don't blame them for that. They worked very hard to support their family. But because of that, I was often left to my own vices, and I found comfort with a new family on the street at 14 years old in 1987.
As we put up another picture of you, this one saluting outside the gates of Dachau, the German concentration camp, I wonder as a teenager how you saw the world.
I was in Germany for a concert. In fact, I was in an American white power skinhead band called White American Youth, and then later in a band called Final Solution. At that age, I really saw the world as very black and white. I was taught to believe that my white race was facing genocide. And so I was very protective. When I grasped the politics at 15 years old of this movement, I became very committed to it and to what we used to call the 14 words, which stand for "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children." And that mantra, that mission statement rang very true for me as I saw my proud Italian neighborhood where many of the same people who came from the villages where my family came from settled. And we started to see increases in crime. I started to witness different races moving into what I thought was my neighborhood and bringing in drugs. And of course, you know, it probably wasn't any different than what happens in any neighborhood, in any city in America or in Canada. In fact, the racism and the violence was probably perpetrated just as much by whites as it was by any other group. But I didn't see that because I closed my eyes to that. And when my bike was stolen by 3 black kids and I was beaten up a few weeks after that encounter in the alley with what happened to be America's first neo-Nazi skinhead gang leader, Clark Martel, I suddenly had a reason to believe everything that they were telling me, that blacks were indeed causing crime in our neighborhood, and that I needed to do something, even at the young age of 14 and 15 years old, to protect my family from an invasion and from a genocide.
14 or 15 may be a little too young to appreciate the irony of your situation, but let me ask you about it now, because, of course, a century ago, Italians would have been viewed in the same way as many of the other ethnic groups that today are in the crosshairs of various skinhead groups. Did you not appreciate that at the time?
No, I didn't. I saw my Italian heritage as a white European heritage that I was very proud of. But what you say is very true. What we see today with immigrants coming to the United States and Canada and refugees coming, I sense my family probably would have been the ire of the same anti-immigrant sentiment had they come over today as when they did in the 1960s. And the irony didn't hit me. I wasn't taught to be racist, but at the same time, I became racist. I learned to be racist from the time I was 14 till I was 22 because of fear and because of ignorance and because I was told that it was everybody else's fault for the problems that I was facing in my life. It was the blacks' fault, or it was the Latinos' fault, or it was the Jews' fault. It was never my fault or my family's fault for the situation that we were in. So we were very good at placing the blame elsewhere and never accepting responsibility ourselves.
Well, let's get one incident on the record here. There of course, were many during your time with the skinhead gangs, but one of the big incidents happened, well, it started inside a McDonald's. You want to share that story?
Sure. I was around the age of 17 or 18 when I was out drinking with some friends of mine late one night, and we stumbled into a McDonald's around midnight. And standing in line were several 16-year-old black kids. And being drunk at the time, we confronted this group of kids, and as they ran out of the McDonald's, we began chasing them. And as we pursued them, one of them turned around and fired several shots from a gun at us and missed. And his gun jammed. And when we found him and when we finally tracked him down, we beat him within an inch of his life. And that was one of the moments that were very important to me for several reasons, because when he was on the ground and I was kicking him, for a moment, I had what I call in my book a moment of clarity. Which was an empathic moment where I felt as though the person on the ground who could barely open his eyes could have been my brother or could have been my friend. And I had this compassionate moment wash over me. And I backed off until the police came. But that moment always stuck with me because I really felt that at that point, what I was doing was completely misguided and wasn't grounded in any reality whatsoever. It was pure, unadulterated violence. I wanted to hate somebody else more than I hated myself at the moment. And it just turned out that these young black individuals were there at that time. And it really set off a series of events for me that allowed me to reconnect with my compassion that I had prior to when I was 14 years old.
Christian, last year on this program, we had a guest by the name of Maajid Nawaz, who led, I guess, somewhat of a similar life to you, insofar as he joined a radical Islamist group and then thought better of it as time went on. I want to play a short clip from that interview, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
What it did for me on a personal level was give me a sense of identity, a sense of belonging where I hadn't felt that I belonged in Essex, where I was born and raised, a sense of empowerment. In many instances, these are false senses, of course. Identity is by its very nature, it's complex, it's multiple. It should be, and it must be multiple. But I, as an angry young 16-year-old, took a very simplistic view on identity and considered myself exclusively a Muslim and nothing else. Or this false sense of empowerment. Feeling like anger and hate and bitterness towards others is empowering, is a false sense of empowerment, but nevertheless was meaningful to me as a 16-year-old.
Christian, I wonder if you see any comparable narrative here between an angry teenager who goes off to join ISIS and partake of that world, and an angry teenager who joins a white skinheaded group in order to wreak havoc in the streets of America.
What Majid says is almost identical to my situation. In fact, Majid is a colleague of mine, and we've spoken at length about this. And the struggle for identity, especially at the age of 14 years old, when a young person is breaking away from the influence of their parents and trying to establish an identity for themselves, is a very real struggle. And the power that's associated with becoming associated with these extremist groups is intense. At 15 years old, when my mentor, the person who recruited me, who was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader, had gone to prison for a series of violent hate crimes, including painting a swastika on the wall of an apartment with blood of a girl who had hung around with the group but had been seen with a black individual. I was able to, at that point, when my recruiter went to prison and the people who had mentored me had gone to prison for those hate crimes, I suddenly was allowed to step into a leadership role. And the power that came along with that was very intoxicating. Suddenly I was 15 and 16 years old, and all the people who had been recruited after me and who I had learned to recruit now suddenly looked to me as their leader. And to have that kind of power at that young of an age, where I was traveling the world, playing to crowds of 4,000 people and becoming somewhat of a celebrity within the movement, was a feeling that was tough to shake. In fact, that was one of the hardest reasons for me to leave the movement, because I had built this whole family, this whole infrastructure around me that consisted of only people within the movement.
Now, the word terrorist gets thrown around a lot these days, but strangely enough, only when it comes to radical Islam. You've already said that you see a lot of yourself in Majid's narrative, and I wonder whether you thought of yourself as a kind of a terrorist when you were doing what you were doing in your previous life.
Absolutely. In fact, what I think most of your viewers may not know is that since September 11th, more than twice the number of Americans have been killed on U.S. soil than by any foreign Islamist radical group combined. And I would venture to say that the same is true for Canada. You know, I think since I left the movement that the movement has changed quite a bit. It's tough when you can't see skinheads on the street, because now they've started to go mainstream. They've started to join militia groups, and they've started to join sovereign citizen movements and extreme Tea Party fringes. And it's difficult to spot this racism because the words are veiled. The rhetoric is the same, but the words that they use are much more mainstream accepted than the words that we used to use. However, the rhetoric is exactly the same. So I would say that white extremists are as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than any foreign terrorist threat that we've seen in this country or in North America.
Want to play another soundbite now. This is again from another former radical named Mubin Sheikh, who's well known in Canada. He's a guy who actually ended up working undercover with CSIS and helped to uncover a plot to behead the then Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. Sheldon, let's play that clip, please. In which case, I want to ask you, on September 11th, 2001, what you thought.
So, you know, I initially celebrated the attacks. I was on my way to work. As soon as I came inside the place, a couple of supervisors came up to me and they were just, they said, you know, Mubin, if anyone says anything to you, please let us know right away. And, you know, in the chaos of the day, I just thought to myself, I was struck by that, you know, that look at them, they're worried about me. While all this is going on, they're worried about me.
Did it make you reevaluate the wisdom of your first reaction to the bombing?
Definitely did.
Okay, so that was a turning point for Mubin Sheikh. What was the turning point for you that got you out of the hate and into potentially looking at a new way of living?
You know, it's really interesting because empathy and compassion, just like Mubin was changed by it, also had a strong hand in helping change my heart as well. At 19 years old, I opened a record shop in Chicago whose purpose was to sell white power music that I was importing from all over the world. This was largely before the consumer internet as we know it. So people were driving in from all over the country to my store in Chicago to buy this white power music that I was importing. As a result of that, and because I wanted to be a good entrepreneur, I also decided I was going to sell all different types of music, like heavy metal or punk rock or hip hop or ska. And because of that, not only were these white power skinheads coming into my store, but for the first time I started to dialogue with black people and with Jewish people and with same-sex couples and gay people. And I started to realize, although at first I was very standoffish and I bit my tongue, I started to realize that I had much more in common with these people of color who I'd alienated from my circle for 7 years than I did with the people who I called family, this group that I had built so passionately for 7 years. And initially, music was what brought me into the white power movement. It's what sustained me while I was in it. But I'm happy to say that music was also something that led me out of the movement, because I bonded over music with these people who I'd alienated for so many years. And the compassion that they showed me, even though they knew exactly what I was about, it changed me, and it started to crack my shell. And I started to relate to these people, and I realized that when they held their child in their arms, it felt the same as when I held my child in my arms. I loved my child, and I felt the innocence, and I reconnected with it the same way that any black person or any Jewish person or any same-sex couple could feel towards their child. And I started to realize that the 7 years that I had spent in this movement were very misguided, and I felt very embarrassed by what I was doing. So when I pulled the white power music from the shelves, of course, because it was 75% of my overall revenue, sales tanked and I had to close my store. But the relationships that I built with these people lasted almost a lifetime. And it was because of their compassion and their empathy towards me, probably when I was the person who least deserved it, is really what started the process to change my heart. I started to connect with people on a human level as opposed to on an ego level. And it really was a major catalyst for my change.
You were obviously, though, a great disappointment to your former friends in the skinhead movement. How did you try to break the news to them that you were repudiating them, and how did they take it?
Well, it was, again, another perfect storm that worked in my favor. I was a very selfish leader at the time, and I hadn't really groomed an heir apparent to take over when I decided to leave. So when I did leave, the group that I was leading locally had imploded. However, I had built a very strong network nationally and internationally, and there were many disappointed people who threatened me and who wanted to see me dead and called me a traitor. And in fact, my phone number and my address and my email address have been published online many, many times. But I think that because of the ire that my former colleagues feel, it reinforces me that I'm doing the right thing. I've found a change of heart, and in fact, I've started an organization just in 2010 called Life After Hate that works with people who are trying to leave these hate groups. Because when I left in 1995, there wasn't any type of support system for people who wanted to leave. I had lost everything. I lost my job, I lost my family, my wife and my children left me. I didn't have a very good relationship with my parents anymore because I had pushed them away. Not only did I have to start at ground zero to try and rebuild my life, I had to dig myself out of a hole because I was still branded this racist by many of the people who knew me. So it was a very difficult and well-deserved struggle for me, but I suffered a depression for 5 years after I left the movement, where I contemplated wanting to take my life, and I started to do drugs and get into alcohol. And then in 1999, I was fortunate enough to be offered a job by IBM, one which I was completely unqualified for, but I got the job, and on my first day of all the millions of places literally that IBM could have placed me, they placed me back in my old high school, the same one that I'd been kicked out of twice, and I was terrified because I thought that for sure somebody was going to point me out and say that that was the evil Nazi from years ago and to get him out of the building, and I thought I was going to lose my job. And in fact, on my first day at school, working this job for IBM, I ran into the old black security guard who I'd gotten in a fist fight with many years before. And I didn't know what to do. I was very scared because I hadn't really confronted my past. I'd tried to outrun it for 5 years. And although my heart had changed, I still wasn't healing. So I decided to run after this gentleman, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and when he turned around, his jolly smile turned into a scowl when he recognized who I was. And all I could muster to say was that I was sorry. And after some words, we shook hands and we both cried and felt like the heavens opened up and surrounded us with this redemptive light. And he made me promise that I was going to tell the world my story.
Well, let me follow up on that and we'll finish on this, Christian, and that is taking a look back now at your 14-year-old self. What advice would you give that kid who was clearly looking for something, found it in all the wrong places? What would you tell that kid today?
I would say that there's a lot more life to live out there without putting yourself in a small box and hating anybody, that if you open up your heart to compassion and feel empathy for other people, that the sky is the limit. And that, I always joke about this too, had a group of ballerinas been across the alley when I was 14 years old, I may have been one of the greatest ballet dancers on earth, and instead I became one of the worst neo-Nazis on earth and influenced a lot of people. But I would say that the world is not limited to what you can just see in front of you, to open your eyes and to experiment and to accept other people, because when you do that, you not only learn more about other people, but you learn more about yourself.
Okay, I have a very disturbing image of you in a tutu right now in my head, Christian. Not cool, not cool at all. Congratulations on the book. It's called Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. Joan Jett did the foreword for your book. Congratulations on that, and it's awfully good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.